Well, Dennis, Richards, thanks for coming on all the way from Tokyo, suburban Tokyo.
That's right.
Yeah, you're a Canadian guy, but you teach at a university there. And I wanted to have you on to talk about the dangers of nuclear energy. So often this debate about nuclear energy is framed in alarmist terms, like the existential threat posed by climate change. That's the position that filmmaker Oliver Stone takes with this documentary Nuclear One. Like we need
Mm.
this, and
Yeah.
they're not really looking at the risks. So I wanted you to give like the other side, as I think it's also very interesting that from your personal experience of actually being in Japan when the Fukushima reactor melted down in 2011. How did that change your direction that you were going and you became so focused on nuclear energy and the risks around it?
Yeah, well, it just confirmed my anti-nuclear stance quite a bit because I think I mentioned in the last interview that we uh, we in Japan had seen a lot of scandals in the nuclear industry and the way it was managed here. There was a lot of scandals over falsification of documents. There was a terrible exposure at one nuclear facility in 1999 that it was called the Tokaimura incident. And there were two uh, employees who were incorrectly mixing nuclear materials in a bucket, and they got exposed to like this intense neutron beam, and one of them died several weeks later, and the other was severely injured by it. So things like that have been happening for several years before the Fukushima disaster, and when Fukushima happened, I just thought, well. Um, that's it. I think there's going to be a real anti-nuclear mood swelling up now because
Take,
the
take us back.
technologies.
Take
Hmm.
us back to that year. What was it? 2011.
Yeah.
Take us back and explain what happened for maybe those young people who weren't paying attention to what
Yeah.
Fukushima was.
Yeah. Well, there was a very powerful earthquake that occurred on March 11th, 2011, and it was much stronger than the nuclear industry had anticipated in their studies of the seismic fault lines and in the area. And then they got hit by this massive tsunami, which disconnected uh, outside electricity supply into the power plant. And so then the nightmare scenario unfolded, whereby you had four nuclear reactors all going into meltdown because they couldn't be cooled. And
And
because of all the water damage,
no,
they couldn't get emergency equipment in to keep everything cooled off.
nuclear reactors have to be by water. Is that correct?
Well, they'll have to be cooled by water. At least the designs that were made in the late 20th century all depended on water cooling.
Now,
So they had to be sited near a river or lake or the ocean and continually pumped with cooling water.
has the Fukushima disaster been contained, or is it still spitting out radiation?
It's still leaking radiation. All the water that passes over it to cool off the reactors, gets contaminated with radionuclides like tritium and so on. So they stored the water in tanks for a long time, and there's a massive field of all these storage tanks, and you can't just easily filter out the tritium from it. And so they pondered for a long time what to do with it and how to release it in a safe way back into the ocean. And and there were international treaties that said they couldn't just take it out into the middle of the ocean and dump it. It had to be dumped in their coastal waters within Japanese territory.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so that's what they've been doing.
this brings uh, to mind a problem with nuclear energy, and that it depends on a source of electricity basically forever. If you don't have electricity to manage the reactors,
Mhm.
um, they go boom. Is that a fair assessment? Anything that
Yeah, I
knocks
wouldn't
out the
say
electricity
forever,
is
but
okay. The
Yeah, the spent nuclear
electricity,
fuel has to be cooled off uh, for quite a long time after it comes out of the reactor. And then a few years later, it can be transferred into these, what they call the dry cask storage
mhm,
facilities. They're still extremely radioactive. The transfer has to happen underwater.
okay.
But then these casks come out and they can be stored on land.
So,
But they have to be shielded.
you know,
And the plan is to eventually bury them somewhere in a deep underground.
the nuclear waste, yeah,
Yeah.
that's really the issue. Maybe we could touch on the nuclear waste, but in one of the articles that you sent me while I was preparing for this, I don't know if you wrote it or somebody else, but there was a sentence that grabbed my attention. You said the thinking seems to be that the risk is too minuscule to think about, but the impact would be too huge to consider. What are
Yeah.
they talking about? What are they talking about there? What was it you that
Yeah,
wrote
that was,
that?
I think it was I who wrote that.
Yeah, what do you
Um,
mean by that?
well, there are certain possibilities, like a nuclear plant being struck by a meteor or a Carrington type event where there's just a massive long-term failure of the electricity grid.
What was the
And
Carrington event? Tell us when was that? 19th century?
yeah, 1859, and telegraph transmission had just been installed, in North America and Europe, and because of this electrical solar storm, all of the electricity went out on this, very early stage electrical grid. So people have always wondered ever since then, if that happens again, now in the 20th century, with our modern electricity grids, how are we going to manage a long-term outage of the
It
grid?
could be from a solar storm, but it
Yeah.
could also be from a meteor.
Well, meteor, I think, would be more local.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
but yeah, it could cause
Um,
a long-term failure.
it's
Or
funny,
like
funny you
a
mentioned
meteor
that.
could go into a lake, like one of the Great Lakes, and cause a huge wave. Or it could hit directly very close to or on the nuclear power plant.
So there are
Um,
nuclear power plants along the Great Lakes.
oh yeah, several of them. Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. Um, Not sure about Lake Michigan. Yeah, I think Lake Michigan has a couple.
Those
But
are the
on both
lakes
sides, the
that
Canadian and
border
American side.
Canadian
Yeah.
side, American side. They both have nuclear reactors.
Mm, yes.
How does a nuclear reactor generate energy? Is it just a very dangerous way of heating up water?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Um, a few weeks ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about elite proposals to place clusters of satellites in outer space, each one the size of 6 school buses. This was what the Wall Street Journal was reporting, that would constantly spray lithium, barium, and salt, sodium, to prevent impact the Earth from receiving, to prevent the impact of a solar storm. But they're saying it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, but they don't know when the solar storm is going to happen. So they want to do this spraying operation. Did you see that article in the Wall Street Journal
No, but
I'm referring
you
to?
told me about that.
Yeah,
But it
it
just
just seems.
strikes me.
Oh, what? Go on.
Go ahead.
No, it's like they're going around they're planning for a solar storm in the wrong way. The real way they should be planning is to insulate the grid. But you think
Mhm.
there's better ways to go about it?
Yeah, I'm not an engineer, but you would think that there'd be a less crazy seeming way of doing it. It just seems like an example of how one technological innovation creates unforeseen hazards, and then to deal with that, they come up with another technological innovation, uh, and nobody knows the consequences of that either. How are you going to manage, to have the correct levels of barium spraying over the atmosphere consistently and know what kind of consequences that's going to have.
Yeah,
That just sounds crazy.
it almost sounds like geoengineering. It is geoengineering.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is kind of the political dimension, because when we talk about the risks of nuclear energy, when people do, it's so often framed in this kind of either or way
Mm.
with respect to climate change, whatever side of the political fence you're on about that. But it does seem like there's an element of mass formation psychology along this issue, where it's like people should be thinking about this, but they're not.
Oh yeah, it's definitely an attempt to get people to panic over climate change. And the nuclear industry has been spending a lot of money and a lot of their own propaganda is very much in line with the global warming fear mongering and promoting themselves as the solution to reducing the carbon footprint of mankind and reversing climate change. Um, so it's very highly motivated by their own interests. And I've noticed too in the people who are politically anti-woke and maybe anti-EU and anti-NATO, they love to point out the foolishness of the European leaders now, and in particular, the German Chancellor uh, before Merz, the woman who was in power there, I forget her name now, but she shut down German nuclear power. Um, and she's mocked for doing that. But the fact is that the German nuclear complex had a lot of problems, and they had failed to find proper storage and long-term waste management problems, and they had an underground waste storage site that had leaked horribly and gone terribly wrong, and they were, they had to bring all the buried waste back out and start thinking about other solutions for it. And that's what caused her to say, these nuclear plants that we have now are old. It's going to be too expensive to refurbish them, and we can't possibly build a new fleet like this going forward. We've got to solve this problem with our nuclear waste. That was the thinking behind the policy change, but now the Germans are just mocked ferociously for having abandoned nuclear power and having lost their source of Russian natural gas supplies.
Mhm.
And then France is held up as a model for continuing with its nuclear power. But there too, there's just lots of problems with their aging nuclear power plants.
Not
And
since the, yeah, not since the
they have to.
Cuban, okay, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say that in France, um, they have a lot of maintenance problems. All the nuclear plants are getting old, and during the summer heat waves, they can't heat or cool off the reactors fast enough because the water's too warm. So they have to shut down. And so just when they need the energy the most, they can't operate it because of the limitations of their cooling systems.
Not since the Cuban Missile Crisis has the world been so close to nuclear war. And now it's just talked about casually in the mainstream press, like it's no big deal. The possibility of some country using a tactical nuke, whether in
Yeah.
Ukraine or in the Middle East. But there's also another threat, which is de facto nuclear war, since energy facilities are being targeted in these conflicts, and it's only a matter of time before a reactor is targeted that can spew radiation. I think there's a reactor in Ukraine that was targeted, or Russia, and I think it's part of the territory controlled by Russia now. Iran hit a site very near an Israeli nuclear reactor recently. So what is your threat assessment about the possibility that these conflicts could bring us into kind of de facto nuclear war?
Yeah. Well, going back in the history a little bit, in the 1990s, there was a book written by Richard Rhodes called Twilight of the Bombs, and he went into detail into the conflict that existed between the new Clinton administration and the North Korean government at that time. And just like they wanted to do with Iraq, they just wanted to take it out and totally eliminate its possibility of building nuclear weapons. And they considered just a full invasion of North Korea to just, do a regime change and take it out. And Clinton came in there rather naively and didn't understand the risks that were involved. And he had to be told by military advisors that North Korea doesn't have a nuclear weapon right now, but if we hit them, the only way that they can deter us is to hit our allies nearby in South Korea and Japan. And he said, and they told him some of the targets will be Japan's nuclear reactors on the west coast of the country, and they'll create a nuclear incident by blowing up reactors. So the reactors themselves become kind of a deterrent to war because people would be afraid to strike them, and you can't control what happens after that. Um, but they're also a kind of weapon as well.
Okay, let's go back to the natural or unnatural disasters that could take out some of these reactors. We mentioned solar storms. I think we mentioned a meteor. There's a possibility of volcanoes or even more esoteric weapons like a electromagnetic pulse or HAARP. There's a lot of scenarios where nuclear reactors could be be crashed. What happens then? What's the day after tomorrow? What kind of scenario could this be a civilization ending type event?
Yeah. Well, you'd have like a massive cloud of cesium. So 137 is the main fallout ingredient, and that wouldn't cause immediate damage, but a large-scale fire, well, a smoldering heap of spent nuclear fuel just burning openly in the air without cooling would put, cesium-137 into the rainfall coming down on populations nearby, and would be carried in the wind as far as wind can carry it. Um, so nobody knows really. And I think what we've seen in the war in Ukraine is that the people who plan the targeting, they know about these risks and they're very careful around nuclear power plants. And the Russians took over Zaporizhzhia power plant
Yeah.
very quickly, and they've kept control of it. And the Ukrainians have fired artillery shells nearby and the facility, but they're very careful not to directly hit one of the reactor buildings or one of the storage pools.
Well, they
So
killed a
I think,
couple of nuclear scientists the other day. Uh,
yeah.
so talk to us about nuclear waste. How is it stored? What are the dangers associated with it? How is nuclear waste made from these
Yeah, well,
reactors?
um, like I said, it's stored in water for a few years until it cools off sufficiently. And then they can transfer it into these dry casks. And then those casks have to be moved around, and a storage facility has to be built for them. And in the United States, there was the proposal to build a long-term storage for all of the United States nuclear waste at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. But that failed. There was opposition to it. And so ever since then, the spent fuel has just been stored at the site of the nuclear power plants mostly, and they're just still waiting for a political solution to this problem. And in my own country, Canada, they go to native Indian communities in Northern Ontario and ask them if they would like to be a willing host community for a deep geologic deposit where these things could be stored. And they promise that jobs will be there and there'll be some economic development and everything will be safe. But they're asking the people who are alive now to give consent to this in the place of generations for thousands of years into the future who will have no say in this. So it's kind of a impossible task, I think, to just ask people to consent to it.
What do
And
you,
as we've seen in the news this month, that region of Northern Ontario is burning up. Massive forest fires have spread there. And one of the towns that had been considering accepting the nuclear waste, I think was totally wiped out by one of these fires. And it's not only the final resting place, but also the fact that the trucks have to transport this material. And so what happens if in the middle of transport these fires break out and the trucks hauling this stuff get stuck there?
Are you talking about the trucks hauling the nuclear material that's going to be stored on these
Yes.
indigenous places?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's right.
Not that these indigenous places would host power plants, but they would actually be storing that.
Yeah, just storing the
Okay.
waste.
What
Which,
do
of
you,
course, the people in southern Ontario, where there's a dense population, um, they don't want these things, and
Mhm,
the nuclear management organizations don't even ask communities in the south because they know there will just be massive
mhm.
political opposition to it. They have to go to these depopulated areas and propose the long-term storage there.
What do you say to people who say that we need nuclear energy because there's no other alternative source of energy available? What do you say to those people?
I say look at ways to conserve energy. Um, Energy conservation can probably achieve whatever uh, practical build out of nuclear energy could be possible. Because at its height, I think I forget the exact number, but it was around 10%. Nuclear produced about 10% of the
Mhm.
energy needs of the whole world.
Yeah.
And that was after a massive buildup in France and the United States and Russia,
Mhm.
Canada. Um, and then now all these plants are getting old. There's never going to be a massive buildup of nuclear energy like that again. So I think you could easily see the possibility of conserving energy by
Mhm.
10%. And at the
Yeah.
same time, the wars that we see happening now demonstrate that fossil fuel is still king. It's going to be with us. We're not going to zero fossil fuels.
Yeah.
It's just too important and crucial. Um,
Years ago,
Nobody's ready for that.
years ago, I read an article about a really innovative and illustrious German mayor who
Mhm.
he wanted to make his German city energy independent. So he got the heads together and he said, okay, let's make energy our priority. And they were using existing technology, wind, solar, combination of a bunch of different things, solar panels. And they made so much energy in that German city that they were then exporting energy to the nearby regions. So there's all sorts of things. There's just not the political will. And of course, I think there's even like free energy, like the kind of energy that Nikola Tesla talked
Mhm.
about, but it's the only applications have been weaponized. And so there's um, I think there's all sorts of solutions. They might even be staring us in their face, you know, hemp, biofuels, there's all sorts of things. Um, but the elites want us to believe that we're always in crisis, there's always going to be shortages. I don't know. It just seems like Oliver Stone in a lot of ways, I guess he's your typical California liberal that he on his website for Nuclear Now, that documentary, he says we're
Yeah.
facing an existential threat by climate change. I just really question that sort of narrative. I don't know if you've got anything you want to say in the next 5 minutes before I let you go.
Yeah, I was surprised to see his take on that. It didn't seem to go with his other political views on war and
Mhm,
peace in the world. Um,
mhm,
but there are lots of counter arguments. There are lots of organizations fighting against this narrative that we need nuclear energy to solve the climate crisis and so on.
mhm, mhm,
And I guess for a final thing to say, I would just like to talk about that utopian vision of having fusion energy or unlimited free energy somehow from Nikola Tesla's inventions. Um, do we really want that? Would that really be a great thing to have no limits and just have all the energy that you ever want all the time? Um, what would be the consequences of that? I mean, I mean, to just really able to expand our urban areas, live in comfort and detachment from struggle and living within, the natural bounds of life. Um, I don't think it would be necessarily a good thing. And if we do get fusion energy to work, I mean, there's huge environmental impacts on that, just from the mining of materials and rare earths that would be needed to build all the fusion energy
What is fusion?
generators.
What is fusion energy?
Well, that's the energy of the sun, from
Well,
hydrogen,
okay.
hydrogen fusion, the energy of a hydrogen bomb,
Hmm.
controlled and managed.
Hmm.
Um,
There's different ways of, well, look, once the nuclear power plant heats all this water, how do they actually send the electricity like to your meter? How do they actually send it to your house? Is it stored someplace? Does it go through the electrical cables? What's the mechanism to
Yeah,
actually
just the
get?
old-fashioned way. Just if they heated the water with gas or oil, or turned a turbine of a waterfall, it would be generating electricity and sending it out to the grid. So,
How do
so
they
that's what
send it?
nuclear power plants do.
It, I'm kind of ignorant in this area. How do they send it out to the grid?
Well, I can't give you a technical explanation. It's not my specialty for sure.
Sure.
Um, but
Are
yeah,
those
it's like
cables like
they,
this? Are the
yeah, just the
cables like,
regular transmission lines.
okay, are those like giant extension cords?
Yeah.
Okay. What are you
Mm.
working on? Any papers that you're working on these days?
Oh, I've been doing a lot of different things since since I worked on nuclear stuff. I kind of uh, I kind of just became exasperated, I guess, when the COVID happened and when the war in Ukraine started. These were the kinds of disasters, I thought shouldn't happen, because if people are paying attention to nuclear issues and nuclear and the danger of nuclear war, they would, focus on just making the world more peaceful and not antagonizing Russia and provoking a war in Ukraine. Um, so I became a lot more concerned about nuclear war than I was with nuclear power. And and
And
then the people who, a lot of
mhm.
the friends I had in the anti-nuclear movement, didn't see anything suspicious about, the cult of Anthony Fauci that formed, and they could see that the nuclear industry was corrupt and driven by financial motivations, but they suddenly became unquestioning about the pharmaceutical industry and what was going on in those days. So I
Yeah,
just kind of,
that's ironic how that works.
yeah.
What was left considered left wing 25 years ago is now considered right wing, and vice versa. And nothing showed that quite as well as COVID and the calls around Anthony Fauci. Dennis Rich's, thank you for coming on the show once again. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me to talk about this. It's hard to fit it all into the 30-minute interview. I feel like we talked so fast through it all, but it deserves a slower uh, development and a slower conversation, I think.
Okay, maybe we can do
Okay.
that sometime. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.